Cool. So welcome to our spring kickoff for the our Ask Me Anything career seminar. And I'm really pleased to have Ricardo joining us today. He is first and foremost a Chico State statistics alumni. I'll say 2019, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And then graduate from UCLA, getting his master's in biostats. His academic research is focusing on identifying interaction terms in correlated and very high dimensional data using feature selection, which is like perfect timing for at least one of my classes. We're talking about variable selection, feature selection.
Right. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So with 5 years experience as a statistical consultant in like life sciences, community health sciences, education. Awesome that you're now a research computational scientist at Children's Health of Orange County, CHOC, which is pretty well known and pretty big down in OC. But so you support research through project ideation, study design, data management, inferential statistics, statistical and machine learning, model building, and always the fun manuscript writing. So I would again super happy that you've agreed to spend your part of your lunch hour chatting with us. And I'll turn the floor over to you to give just kind of a little brief background, again, details, and then we'll open the floor to questions. We've got some kind of like seed questions, and just, yeah.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm happy to be here. So as Robin said, my name is Ricardo Aguilar. I got my bachelor's degree in statistics at CSU Chico, and then my master's degree in biostatistics at UCLA. I'm a research computational scientist 1, which is in short, basically a data scientist. So I think in terms of more of my background and how I got to where I am today, I think that would start back in high school, where I did a lot of volunteer work, and I found that I really enjoy helping people and having a positive impact on people's lives. And in addition to that, I took calculus and statistics courses, and I found that I was really good at math. So I then applied to CSU Chico. I think I was an applied math major. And then while I was doing that, I was doing research on a career that can combine both my mathematical skill set and my desire to help people. And I found out about biostatistics, which is statistics applied like with an emphasis on public health. And then I switched my major over to statistics, and Robin became my undergraduate advisor. And I was very fortunate that she gave me many opportunities to start my statistical consulting career. And then I also did a honors in the major while I was at CSU Chico. And then I went on to UCLA for biostatistics, spent 2 years there. I did my thesis on identifying interactions in correlated high dimensional data. And then after I graduated, I then moved on to CHOC, where I became a research computational scientist 1. And so basically what I do at CHOC is everything that Robin listed, which is project ideation. So a physician may have an idea of something that they might want to work on, but not quite a refined research question. And so I help them kind of get there to a research question that can be answered through some sort of analysis. And then so then once we get to that point, we do study design, where we start thinking of inclusion exclusion criteria and getting a better idea of what the cohort is that we're looking at. And then data management, where I and sometimes I pull data from a database that we have, or if the physician already has the data, then we just use that and clean it up. Then I conduct the actual analysis, which involves the inferential statistics and the statistical and machine learning model and model building. And then finally, the fun part of manuscript writing. And all of these are, iterative processes, so it's not necessarily like one step to the next to the next. It's sometimes it can take multiple attempts to get to the next step. And then I think that's about it in terms of my background and my current role. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll open the floor first. If Zoe or John Paul or anybody has not really calling you guys out specifically, but do you have some questions?
Sure, yeah. So I'm very familiar with biostatisticians working in like healthcare companies, like maybe like healthcare insurance and things like that.
Right.
Like, how is what you do different than working at, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but how is what you do different than working in like a insurance kind of deal?
Right. So from my knowledge and understanding of some of the people who were in my cohort moved on to that role, so I do have a little bit of knowledge there. Their role tends to, and their research tends to focus on like risk analysis as well as the financial aspect of things. While I can also do that, I also try to do research that advances medicine. And so we can try to improve the care of patients at CHOC. And I think that's where the two kind of divert, is that I mostly focus on improving the care of the patients there.
Very cool. Thank you.
Sure.
After your training in the master's program, do you feel as if you're, I don't want to make it sound negatively, do you feel like you're stuck in specifically in the biostatistical realm of stats, or do you felt like that training was adequate if you wanted to hop to a different field, I guess?
Well, could you elaborate a little more on like what the different field would be?
Like, let's say you suddenly was interested in like more like financial statistics, or you wanted to look in more like
Right.
econometrical data.
Okay.
Like, do you feel like you're strictly in biostatistics?
Oh, no, not at all. So the good thing about stats is it can be applied to pretty much any field. And even when you start applying for places, they'll often say statistics background or like econometrics or data science, computer science, anything that has to do with some understanding of mathematics, you can move on to. And so if I were to say, kind of feel like maybe public health isn't the right field for me, then I could easily move over to a different field.
Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. So I'll ask a question. So what surprised you about your current career that you didn't expect going into it?
I think maybe one thing that surprised me was how iterative of a process it can be. Because, when you do your homework in class, you just do one thing and then move on to the next. But when you're working with multiple people, maybe they don't quite agree with a certain approach you took. And so you have to refine it. And then, you produce another, whether it's like a data set or analysis or whatever it is that you're kind of debating on. And then this, can take period of months, maybe even multiple years, to get from the stage of project ideation to, you know, manuscript submission to a journal or something like that. But it varies from project to project, and so you could spend maybe a couple weeks on one project, maybe a few months, maybe a year and a half. And so it just kind of varies. But that is one thing that I didn't quite expect. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, especially you're not only kind of like finding new things as you're exploring and working with the data, but then, as you said, you're working with other project teams and different ideas, different approaches.
Right.
Nice having teams though too, right?
Yeah, I've definitely learned a lot from, I guess, disagreement, you could say. So, you know, you might think that one approach is the best, and then someone's like, oh, but have you considered this thing? And then you're like, oh, you're right, I didn't consider that thing. And so then now you have to change your analysis or your approach, or even go back and you know, pull data again that can actually be analyzed in the correct way. I'm very fortunate that my boss and another person that I work closely with, they kind of act as my mentors. And so I feel like I've learned much more in the year, and I think it's 3 months now that I've been working here, than I did in at like my graduate program. Mostly because the graduate program, I feel like, gives you the basic foundation and building blocks. And then once you start working with real world data, that basic foundation has to now be expanded to something much more, because data doesn't always quite work the way that you want it to. And in, you know, textbooks, it's a data set that's been chosen by the author for that specific purpose. But when you're working, the data is given to you regardless of, you know, how you would want it. So you have to make the best out of it. And so, you know, you have to really expand past your current knowledge while working.
I have another question, but I think
Sure.
someone asked something in the chat. You might want to address that first.
Nope, you go first.
Okay. Just wondering, do you feel, what was your rationale at stopping at the master's? Like, did you have any intent on going for the doctorate? And if so, like, what was your experience in that dilemma, that decision?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because that's something that I kind of debated during my last year of my master's program. I personally, I felt like I was ready to start getting experience. And then I do actually want to continue on to a PhD. And so this fall, I'm going to be applying for the next year's like fall quarters for universities to hopefully get into a PhD program. But it's more of a personal thing. You can work at a pretty good amount of places with just a master's degree. And so if you want to get a feel for what you're going to be doing, it's something that you can definitely do. And also, when you get to graduate school, it can take a toll on you, because it's a lot of work. And so if you feel like you need that break, then you could also just take that break and then later on continue to your PhD program.
Yeah, that was my intention coming out of undergrads, like 2 years done, gonna go work. Did not anticipate or expect to get sucked in to the doctorate. And it was because I kind of wanted to just keep doing what I was doing. I had a good kind of grad student researcher job. And so it was kind of functioning as a master's, kind of like what a master's job would sort of look like.
That's funny, because I had the opposite, where I was in the PhD program. And when I was in it, I was like, oh, I'm never going to go into research or academia and I can do what I need to do with my master's. So who the heck knew this was going to happen for me? Right. So it really is, I think, just depends on like your passion and what you want to do. But I did note in the chat that you don't have to have a master's before you get a PhD. And a lot of
Right.
people don't realize that. But in certain fields, a master's, for additional education, may be all you really do need to be competitive for jobs. Or if you don't want to go into academia at a 4-year, that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very common for statistics to go into the masters, but it's more common in math to go straight to the PhD without the masters. But that's like, you gotta like ace all of your senior level super hard classes, like ace. No. Yeah. So
Yeah, and there was actually someone in that same like incoming year into my graduate program that only had his bachelor's and was in the doctoral program at UCLA. So yeah, it's something that you can also do in stats, but it's not quite as common from my own experience.
did
Um,
did that person have to also take some master's level classes as well?
Yeah, so both the PhD and master's students take the same courses for that first comprehensive exam. And then in the, I think it's the third year, or at least this is how it's done at UCLA. In the third year, they start taking those PhD level courses that will be their, I guess, their second comprehensive exam. And then the master's students, well, at that point would have probably graduated if they passed their first comprehensive exam.
I know there's like no way for you to like really know because the grass is always greener kind of thing. But I'm actually applying to LA's biostat master's program for next fall. And I was just wondering, like, did you enjoy it? Like, would you do it again? Or would you have gone somewhere else? Or do you have any tips about it?
So I will say that at the time, when I first went in, I think it was during the winter quarter, that's when COVID started. And so we went to remote. So I didn't quite get that same experience that you might get in person. It was like an adjustment for everyone. So, I mean, you could probably say that maybe I it wasn't quite as good as it would be in person. Personally, I prefer in-person instruction. And then the professors, they were happy to work with you, especially if they know that you wish to continue on to a PhD. They're very supportive, and they're very welcoming in their office hours, at least the ones that I had. And they have a vast wealth of knowledge that goes like, sometimes it'll go far beyond what you can even understand at the time, but they'll be happy to break it down for you. And then to try to get you to understand it as well. In terms of, or to answer your final question, like if I would do it again, I think I certainly would.
When you entered your undergraduate here at Chico State, did you know you wanted to be in statistics in that sort of like public health field, or is that something you found through your education? And if so, like what made you turn towards this field as your career?
So I first went into Chico as applied math, and then while I think it was maybe within the first month or so, I was doing a lot of research. I don't know, I felt that pressure of like, I have to decide what I'm gonna do. And so I did a lot of research about what careers you can do just with like math in general. And then I started looking more into statistics, as it's one of the courses that I took in high school, and I could easily see how it can be like applied to many other things. And so I think that's the thing that I really like about statistics is like I had taken so many math classes, from like first grade to your senior year at high school, but you're never really applying them to something meaningful. At least that's how it felt like for me. You know, you get like the word problems, but it's always some hypothetical thing. But with statistics, you can actually drive research further. You can, you know, push things beyond where they currently are. And so that's what really drove me to statistics, is I want to add to the current methodologies and push beyond what we currently have to be able to do analyses on data that, you know, we can't currently do. But there's a lot of questions that need to be answered in health, and, you know, you need to make those new methods to be able to answer them.
So there was a question in the chat about, are there any courses or experiences that you recommend or like kind of wish you had for the students here, like for them to kind of explore to be prepared for future jobs or competitive for future jobs?
So recommendations is, if you're doing stats or something that requires consulting, start getting into that. Talk to your advisors and see if they have any projects that they would be willing to add you onto. In terms of courses, one thing that I did wish I have that would have helped in grad school would be like the advanced linear algebra course. When I was at CSU Chico, that course, there wasn't enough people to you know, justify having the course, and so I wasn't able to get that further understanding of linear algebra, which is like 99% of what stats is calculus and linear algebra. So it would have definitely helped out. But I mean, if you don't take it, it's not the end of the world. You know, I was able to understand what was going on. It just takes a little more effort than someone who's had more experience and is more comfortable with it.
Did you make up for the fact during your master's program? Because I'm dealing with the same exact thing where I wanted to take the upper division linear algebra this semester, but it just wasn't offered. So do you feel as if you caught up in a sense during your master's?
I do feel like I caught up. I knew enough to get like the understanding of things, but to get beyond what you need to understand, like to get that really in-depth knowledge of what the math is behind certain things. And once you get to those really advanced models where like the math just looks like crazy and some other language, you're definitely going to need that foundation. But the good thing is that the professors that I had, they supplied different resources and like links to stuff so that you can kind of start looking at like what the linear algebra and the math is, like the math that's going on in the background.
That's so Stephanie had asked me a question, but I think it's very good for this whole thing is we could look into options for having students take linear algebra from a different campus. Because the CSU, you guys can take courses from any other CSU and it counts towards your degree. I mean, like it's transferable kind of thing. Like you can take them for free, and so it just
Be online.
is something that we need to look into. This is a hard course. But we are still continuing to try to explore ways to make this class offered more often, because it definitely used to be required. I had to take it.
Yeah.
And then for reasons, sometime between when I was a student and when I came back, it is no longer required for the stat degree. So
Yeah, but just with the budget cuts, we have to find ways, you know, to get these courses to students.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the only way. So in Southern California, their enrollment is as bad as ours, and so they don't have as many cuts. Maybe that could help.
yeah, no, that's actually a really good idea. So to kind of look into that for sure. Thank you.
And then I'll also add that that advanced linear algebra is pretty hard. So if you do decide to enroll for that, make sure that you get a professor that can explain things really well, because you know you could get to the right answer and pass the class, but if you don't actually understand what's going on, you can't apply it. So just make sure that if you're gonna go for that, you're gonna do your best to get a really thorough understanding of what's going on.
Mhm.
If that became an option, how does that look actually doing it? Would I have to like apply to a different school or is
have
it all
no
through Chico?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I know who to ask to find out.
Yeah, I
Alright.
know that's not the case. We just have to connect with our registrar's office, I think, we have to talk to the right people, like Robin said.
I
Yeah.
know it can be done, and I know who to talk to figure out how to do it. I just have never actually seen it happen before yet.
All right, thank you.
Um. What skills do you skills, tools, techniques that do you use like on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, things that I use would be, well, it's kind of obvious, but communication. Your research and analysis means nothing if no one can understand it. So you need to be able to communicate to not just people who have a background in statistics or whatever it is that you're doing, but people who have like absolutely no background in any math. And so if you're able to break those concepts down into something that can be easily understood, that's really, really helpful. And that also really helps you get hired at places. It's one of the common questions that I got when I was being interviewed was, how would you describe this thing to someone without a math background? Other skills, I guess it would be my experience in like programming languages. So using R, SQL is a giant, huge thing that you need to learn. It's what I use to obtain data from a remote server. It's pretty much like the common thing when it comes to working with databases is using SQL or SQL. It depends on however you want to say it. And then just be aware that there's also different versions of SQL. So for the most part, they're pretty similar, but there's just some little things here and there that are not included in other versions. So you have to make do with what you have. Other skills like using R. I think at some point I took some computer science courses, and those were really helpful. With my current programming, it just gives you a deeper level of like how to get what you want from the data, like, you know, doing loops through things to extract data and making your code really efficient, because we work with hundreds of millions of rows of data. And so if your code is really inefficient, A, it's going to take long, and B, it's going to cost a lot to run everything. But I think those are probably like the main things that I use on a daily basis.
So does anyone else have a question? No, okay.
Mhm.
Considering that most of your education is in statistics and you're working in public health, do you feel as if your lack of subject knowledge is ever a hindrance? And if so, how do you overcome that usually?
That is a great question. So at first, when I was barely learning things, yeah, there's a lot of terms that you're going to need to learn, but it's very easy to pick up on the fly. The thing that helps you the most is when you, during a study on something really, really specific, conduct a literature review, get familiar with the terms, and then it just becomes something that becomes part of your vocabulary. And it honestly, it's just something that you need, or something that you'll get with time, because it is a lot to learn. Like, you learn all the statistical and data science jargon, and then you get thrown into this new set of terminology that you won't quite be familiar with. But it's pretty easy to pick up on. I don't think I was ever ever felt like it was holding me back or anything like that. And it's a question that I've also talked to with my coworkers, and they all felt the same. Usually your background is going to be in something really technical, and so once it's applied, you need to learn those terms, but it's pretty easy to learn.
Thank you.
Sure.
So if you're thinking, this is kind of for the students, if you're thinking about biostatistics or anything in the public health, you might notice 2 degrees, a master's in public health versus a master's in statistics, or a doctor in public health versus a PhD. And so the main difference is, do you get the master's in statistics, the MS and the PhD, you get some more deeper technical, mathematical theory, statistical theory courses. The public health, the MPH, the DRPH, you get more of a broad exposure. So I have a doctor in public health. Instead of taking 2 more deep theory probability classes, I took and deeper not model building, linear modeling classes that really heavily rely on all that linear algebra. I took, I think, 4 other broad classes and a bunch of other public health fields. So I was exposed to that language, that terminology. So I kind of had a heads up on that collaboration with those people, because that's the direction I wanted to go. So that's the main difference between those 2. And it's that degree separation is pretty public health specific, I think. I don't think I've seen that in other fields.
We're also, public health is funner.
Yeah.
We're fun to work with.
Yeah, I will say that if you get like a master's in science as opposed to a master's in public health, or the PhD as opposed to the, is it like DRPH, you do get that, because you get that deeper understanding, you know how to tweak things to get what you want. And that's going to be really helpful if you want to branch out and kind of start conducting your own methods. But you could still easily get an understanding of other methods that people are doing. You really only need to understand it enough to be able to use it and when to use it. But beyond that, if you really want to start tweaking things and changing little parts here and there to be like specific to your data or whatever you're working on, then I would heavily recommend the MS or the PhD.
That's a very good point, because for anyone coming out of our undergrad, like the stats, go MS, because that will give you the option of what you want to do if you want to go into a PhD. If you come in with if you do the MPH, the Masters in Public Health, because you're not taking one of those critical math courses, it kind of, I can't say it acts as a barrier, but it makes it harder to apply for at least the PhD. I don't think you could go from an MPH to a PhD. They're like, no, you need to go MS to PhD. So just be aware that there's subtle differences. You can always go from the PhD to the applied side. It's harder to go back. So yeah, excellent. Really, really good point. Ricardo, really.
Ricardo, I also wanted to reiterate the point you made about communication. From someone who does not have the math or stats background, I rely heavily on the experts to help guide the study design, because we may have an idea in public health of who we want to participate, how we want them to participate. And when it comes to the sample size or different controls, we really need your guidance, because some of that work can be meaningless in the end if we didn't have that insight, with the original design. So I appreciate you saying that, and to be able to communicate and even ask questions prior to the data being collected.
Right. Yeah. Communication is key in the success of any study. You need to know your audience and be able to explain it and break it down to the audience that you have. It's a really, really useful skill to learn. And it's something that, you can just practice yourself if you're doing homework. Just explain it as someone who, like, if you're talking to Robin, someone who has a background, or if you're talking to someone who doesn't know anything at all in math, and you have to put it, you have to put it in terms of the context rather than the math or, the statistical jargon. So it's really helpful to learn how to do that.
Another quick question that kind of stems from my last one. Does that broad overview of public health in the DRPH, do you guys feel as if, how can I say it? Does that include the more biological concepts in biostatistics? Because biostatistics, it's like, it both encompasses that more public policy edge of public health, and also I worked in using statistics for biological systems. So do you feel like your education includes that information on biology so that you know what variables to look for X project? Did you understand the question, or should I rephrase it?
Yeah, can you rephrase it?
Do you feel as if your knowledge on biological systems is lacking, and how do you overcome that? Like, do you talk to professional biologists and they tell you what to look out for, and you're like, oh, X person said that Y variable is important, and so I'm going to account for it? Or do you independently, are you well versed in that?
So I think this is a question that it's really good because there's no way that you can absolutely know everything in every part of like health and medical research. And so you're usually going to be consulting with an expert, whether it's like a hematologist, a neurologist, whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to be consulting with some sort of expert that has really, really in-depth knowledge of what to control for, what to look for, signs that maybe your data wasn't collected correctly. If, a percentage, if you're looking at like the percent of people in your cohort who have like eczema, for example, maybe it's really high, maybe it's really low, and maybe it's like so high or low that it's concerning that you may have collected the data wrong. It's really, really helpful to talk to these subject matter experts. There are a lot of folks who have both like an MD and like a PhD. And they would probably be able to handle a lot more of the studies independently. But if you don't have the resource of being able to talk to a subject matter expert, you can always do a literature review. There's always something that can help you kind of close the gap on that knowledge.
Thank you.
And so I have also an undergrad in biology and a minor in chemistry. And how that has helped me is just understanding the baseline terminology. I know what DNA is. I know what methylation is. I know, what hydrolysis is. So when the consultant, the client, the researcher, the doctor come and start talking to you in their technical jargon, you're not completely lost. But part of the communication is when you don't understand something, you ask, is me knowing this critical? Can you explain this in a different, way? Like, I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with what that term is. Right. So there's no expectation that you are knowledgeable about the subject matter domain that you are helping research on. You are seen as the data statistical expert. Having that background knowledge of that other domain language, whether it be biological systems or not, is a bonus. What I thought you were asking, and maybe is biostatistics deal with more lab-like biological data, not public health survey data. Was that actually what you were asking?
In my experience, it's both. And I was wondering like how much does DRPH focuses on one or the other?
Between those two, it's not about a subject matter thing.
Okay.
So the other, in DRPH, again, it's going to depend on the school. The other classes you'll take are going to be in public health specific fields. If you want more of that lab science, that's more of a statistical genetics, that's a biomathematics. Um,
Like genomics too.
genomics, yeah. So that was a surprise for me going into biostatistics, is I wasn't looking at viruses as much anymore as the people that have the viruses. But I could have customized, I could have sought out those researchers. I could have tailored my electives to look at that specific. I took an environmental toxicology class because it was fun. As part of that. So you have your choice in, do you want to look at humans? Do you want to look at systems? Do you want to look at policy? Do you want to look at lab data? And that's just statistics in general, not I mean, like, that is true for statistics as it is for biostatistics, right? So you could customize even in a stat program.
Yeah, and then you can also get like not just like the applied field stuff, but in terms of the stats, different areas of stats, you can take more causal inference courses. You could take more like those what are they called? Like sampling methods courses. Bayesian statistics courses. There's different areas that you can focus on depending on what you want to do. It's different roles will require a different skill set. Like you can't really know everything in stats. Stats is just a huge subject, like field, that there's no way that you're going to be an expert in everything. So if you know, it helps to know, if you figure out what you want to do, what skill set you'll need. And so when you're in your grad program, you can kind of tailor those courses to whatever it is that you're going to eventually be doing.
I was just going to say too, as a biochemist, I would have expected the statistician to understand the very details of what biomarkers we were looking at or samples that we were analyzing. We would never have expected that. I think it's just an awareness of the types of samples maybe that you would get and the way that data is being collected. Just to reassure you though, that would not be something you would expect. I mean, you have to know when you're doing that kind of research, it's so specialized in what you're doing. Even the people in biochemistry might not even know what you're actually doing because it's so specialized. So just to reassure you, that would not be an expectation.
So looking at the time, I want to thank Ricardo again for spending an hour with us and sharing his ideas and thoughts and experiences and guidance and all sorts of amazing things. Super appreciated. And thanks for all the students being here as well. And if I could find that link I just had again, if you could take a moment to, no, don't send it to everybody here. Same survey, but it's post. So same quick questions, just helps for our grant. So we can keep bringing awesome people like Ricardo and any other of his colleagues that he thinks may be interested in talking to students. So super appreciate it. The recording will be posted online. If you have any follow-up questions, I can pass them to Ricardo. I don't think his email's directly posted, but happy to help. So thank you again.
Yep, happy to be here. And yeah, if anyone has any questions that they think of afterwards, I guess you could send them to Robin and she'll send them my way. And I'll respond as soon as I can. But thanks for everyone who listened to me talk for the last 45 minutes or so.
All right.